Welcome back to the podcast. Today I'm joined by Aaron Wilson, co-founder of Approved Jets. Aaron has a rare blend of operator mindset, investing strategy exposure, and a deep curiosity about emerging tech. And he's building in one of the most relationship-driven industries there is, private aviation. What I want to explore today is what people misunderstand about charter and brokerage and how supply chain actually works, and what it takes to scale a modern brokerage while keeping trust and service quality intact. Aaron, thanks for joining.
Thank you, Mark. I really appreciate you having me, and it's great to be here.
Excellent. So, Aaron, give us the quick version of your journey. What brought you into private aviation and ultimately into Approved Jets?
For sure. So I started out my career in finance at JP Morgan. Eventually, after a few years at JP, transitioned into recruitment and human capital consulting. Worked very heavily in the recruiting space, recruiting talent for anywhere from hypergrowth startups to more established Fortune 500 and Fortune 100 companies. That's where my interest in working within the hypergrowth startup space and also emerging technology was reaffirmed. So after some time in human capital, eventually left and went out on my own completely. And that was where I became a strategic advisor to the CEO of a company called Vomos. So Vomos actually was operating in a bifurcated capacity toward the luxury space. So there was a tech-enabled mobile application and simultaneously a private aviation brokerage. So that's where I really cut my teeth in the space and got to understand how the industry worked. So this was circa 2018, 2019. While there, the director of sales, a guy by the name of Kelvin, he actually was someone who I was able to connect with very well. And we identified a lot of white space in the industry and a lot of opportunity to do things differently, get closer to that white glove client experience. So it's not solely relegated to being transactional. And that's when we left FOMOS and we formed Approved Jets. So this was back in 2019. Since then, we've been kicking ever since. We've been able to grow organically and we've amassed a pretty robust client base that consists of anyone from an ultra high net worth individual to a physician to, well, they're all ultra high net worth individuals or high net worth individuals, but they varied in profession across physicians, attorneys, musicians, and so on and so forth. We've also been fortunate to service an array of enterprises as well. Some of your favorite, I guess you'd say, from some of your favorite apparel companies, some of your favorite advertising firms and things of that nature. So it's been a great trip thus far. And some of our more exciting initiatives, I'd say, would be centered around how to leverage emerging technology to create a more seamless experience, and also exactly what emerging technology looks like from an enterprise SaaS perspective when it comes to providing lifestyle support for high net worth individuals and people who are just very, very, very busy, and executives, et cetera. So yeah, that's a bit about us.
So, Aaron, Approved Jets is described as one of the fastest growing brokerages. What has been the why now behind the growth?
Yeah. So during the time when we were first brought to fruition, right, we did not know what was ahead. Right. We didn't know what direction the world was heading in. And when we actually formed the company, it was in the summer of 2019. Right. So we branched off, we formed this company. Then March 2020, right, when we're picking up steam, picking up momentum, everyone has to shelter in place. We are now dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic. So at that point, obviously, we didn't know that, 6 months prior, when we started the company, we would have to deal with a pandemic and also travel restrictions attributed to a pandemic. So we're thinking to ourselves, what are we to do so that we could continue to grow and remain competitive in the market? And it actually ended up having, I guess, positive impact on our business, because individuals who were frequent first-class flyers then started flying private. And during that specific juncture, the economy wasn't really in a terrible place, where the individuals who were more likely to fly private had to think to themselves about price sensitivity a lot more. We just weren't there in 2020, right? Of
Mhm.
course, things were rocky for a few people in lieu of COVID. Nevertheless, the price sensitivity was not going to be something that would hinder our ability to make money and get clients. So we're fortunate and blessed to be able to grow the business during that time and prosper. And we really doubled down on market share more than anything else, as opposed to focusing primarily on healthy profit margins. A lot of our competitors, they're solely transactional. They are focusing solely on profit margins. But because we were more high frequency, lower profit margins that gave us the cash flow to be able to scale without needing external capital from an LP or any kind of investor, et cetera.
And Aaron, that's fascinating about the impact of COVID and the positive effect it made on your business. And it makes sense when you describe it.
Yeah,
You know, people that normally flew the commercial airlines,
right.
right? First class, it makes total sense. I'm going to fly private.
Right.
And that is awesome. So, Aaron, here's a question. What did you underestimate about the aviation space before you got deep into it?
Well, I'll be completely transparent. Underestimated the way that vendors viewed themselves in the supply chain. And
Mm,
by vendors, specifically Part 135 operators, etc. So there are some amazing Part 135 operators out there. Amazing.
mhm,
We have great relationships with them. When we need on demand charters, they're there for us and they provide great support. However, there are also some bad actors, right? There are some bad
mm,
actors who use the bait and switch in terms of aircraft availability. There are bad actors who will last minute cancel a trip, right? And
mhm,
at that point, when you cancel a trip, you're leaving me with no options. And now I have to speak to my client and try to figure something out because they still have to go from point A to point B. Then also, there are vendors who will literally accept your money, pull a bait and switch, and then will not refund you. They'll tell you you have a credit with them. So now your back is against the wall and you're forced into chartering with them again, even though they ghosted you or they were unreliable or they had some kind of AOG situation or mechanical issue. So it's really vendor management, relationship management, and being able to understand that in the supply chain, there are push and pull levers. And when you're
mm,
downstream in the supply chain and you're the last entity or person who has any kind of say in that process before it gets to the end client, you don't really have as much leverage to make sure that the experience is seamless, right, for that end client. Because if the operator is not on top of the pilots and doesn't have the pilots report on time and they're late, now the end client is upset with us, but we don't control the arrival time of pilots, right? These
mhm,
kinds of things that are very nuanced. Or even, for instance, a lot of people, when they charter a private jet, they think of a charter as if they're the owner of the aircraft. That's not how it works.
okay.
We can even build in slide time departure buffers. So you say you want to leave at 1, you have a track record for being notoriously late. We'll create a 1 p.m. departure with a 2-hour slide time. So we're good between 1 and 3, providing that this doesn't impact crew duty parameters because we want to make sure that we're remaining compliant, right? So these are
Absolutely.
all the things that we did not think about. And it really just, not that we didn't think about, but we didn't know that we'd face it in such a very, very grave way where it's like,
Right.
wow, this could really crush your business if your vendors are not responsible, reliable,
Mhm,
trustworthy, and accountable, right? Because at the end of the day, you can be trustworthy, where I trust you'll get the mission done. You can be reliable, where you 9 times out of 10 don't have AOGs, or if you do, we have a recovery aircraft. However, when it comes down to accountability, if you're not willing to do your part and say, hey, this is on us, this is what we can
mhm,
do in order to make it right for your client, because we want to retain you as a client, right? Approved Jets being the client of that operator. And they want us to retain our end client because it's an ecosystem where everyone is going to get what they need if we operate with a certain level of mindfulness and accountability. But a lot of
right.
operators, they don't care because they're they seem to be run by some individuals who aren't necessarily owners of those actual firms. So because you're not an owner of the firm, you're not thinking of the long-term implications behind reputational damage and relationship damage that happens when you pull a fast one on a broker. Hopefully that provides some adequate context.
It does. It's intriguing because you have all these complexities and you have to be compliant and you have to serve the customer.
Right.
But these clients, what's the best way to educate them without turning it into a lecture about these complexities?
It's interesting because when these situations happen, I never resort to, hey, let me give you a crash course in flying private 101, right?
Mhm.
It's more so as long as you can articulate very clearly how things go in terms of standard operating procedure, people are typically fine. All people want are their expectations to be managed and for you to level set their expectations. So hypothetically speaking, if I know that there's an AOG or a mechanical issue, right, I'll let the client know immediately, or I'll have my team let them know immediately, right? As opposed to beating around the bush and that person is sitting there waiting at an FBO thinking they're going to depart shortly and they don't,
Mm,
is when someone gets upset. Imagine sitting at the airport, right? From a commercial standpoint, imagine sitting at the airport and you're supposed to depart at 3 p.m. 3:15 p.m. comes and you still haven't departed, but nothing's been communicated to you. So you proactively reach out and someone says, hey, you're not going to leave on time. There's an AOG. We need to find you another plane. Why am I finding out after I proactively reached out to you? You should have proactively reached out to me to inform me so I could operate
mhm,
accordingly, right? There's a premium that comes along with paying for any kind of service in terms of the value of the relationship and the fact that you should be focusing on retaining me as a client, right? So these are
mhm,
some of the things that come into play where it doesn't need to be educational from a boring information overload drinking from a higher fire hose perspective, but more so, hey, we have a mechanical, it's an AOG, which is an acronym for aircraft on ground in the event that you hear that in the future, right? The kind of letting them know that that's the educational piece. We're going to do our best to identify a recovery aircraft for you. We'll keep you updated every step of the way and be very transparent. And if they ask you, how long will this take? Be transparent. If you have another recovery aircraft that you just need to make sure that they're all good to go, then hey, let them know, hey, I'm just getting, the final approval on a recovery aircraft. These are the specs of the aircraft, a year of make, refurbishment. These are the pictures, etc. And you move accordingly, right? But if it's something where it's like, hey, we have no recovery aircraft in sight, and it's
mhm,
probably going to take our team about 12 hours because right now there are no owners and operators who have aircraft in position where you are. So they would have to reposition, which would cost an additional amount. And this is that
mhm,
amount. And we want to avoid you having to pay extra. So we have two choices here. We could reposition that aircraft that could get you from point A to point B for an additional 10, 15, 20, or you can wait until tomorrow. Do you have hotel and lodging accommodation so that you could wait until tomorrow? If not, we can assist you with arranging that. This is what real support looks like.
exactly. And those things that you described are really things outside your control, right? And it impacts your business, it impacts your clients,
Right.
which is not a very comfortable position to be in. But let me take the converse of that. So do you ever have situations where everything's perfect, aircraft's there, the
Yeah.
crew's there, and
Yeah.
the client all of a sudden is like, this is private, I own the airplane, I can show up 2 hours late and that's okay. Do you ever have those situations?
All the time. All the time. All the time. People think private charter should be the experience of that of a Part 91 owner,
Mhm,
right? You don't own the aircraft. And that crew and that pilot, they actually have a schedule they have to adhere to where they need to be
mhm,
somewhere by a specific time so the crew can get rest
yeah,
so they can continue to charter or execute the charters that were already on the schedule,
mm,
right? So these are some of the things that have to be kept in mind that are often absent as far as consideration goes on the client side. They're not thinking about
Mm,
that, right? Yeah. And
yeah.
then in terms of the unforeseen, your plane might be in White Plains at HPN, right? And you want to leave. And there was a snowstorm last week and it's very cold. And you may have to de ice the plane, which may take additional time and it comes
Yes.
with an additional fee, right? De icing, these things cost money. Or
Mm,
perhaps fog. That's a big thing, right? We need to have a certain level of visibility when taking off and so on and so forth, etc. And these things, we don't control these things, but we do err on the side of caution as it pertains to mitigating risk as much as possible.
mm,
So if we see there being a potential threat to safety or anything like that, we're going to let the clients know. We've done this many times where clients get upset with us, and it's like, you do realize we don't control the weather, right? If you're delayed, you're delayed. And what's even crazier is, it's really unfortunate what happened with, one of the best basketball players to ever live, right? And that was attributed
yeah.
to not erring on the side of caution from what we know, right?
Mm,
So when people get frustrated because there's a delay that is a result of inclement weather or fog or visibility or lack thereof, there has to be a certain level of understanding that no one is trying to keep you at an FBO or prevent you from flying. We only grow and prosper when our clients have an amazing experience and they come back, or they have an amazing experience and they post about it, or they have an amazing experience and they tell someone and refer someone. So our ultimate goal is to make sure things go as close as possible to perfect.
well, and Aaron, I like the way you expressed it earlier, where you said it's about communication too, and about being proactive in that communication.
Right.
And before the customer finds out, letting them know what's going to, because it sounds like there's all different types of challenges that can present themselves to the aircraft operation that could impact schedule. And ultimately, and thank you for saying this, it's about safety,
Right.
right? Because that's paramount, and that's awesome. And Aaron, a lot of people think scaling your business is just marketing. And in
Right.
aviation, it seems like scaling is operational,
Right.
relational, regulatory, all at once, right? And
Right.
when brokerages grow fast, what tends to break first?
When brokerages grow fast, financial infrastructure is very important. A brokerage is seen as a risky business for financial services institutions and payment processors. So you have to identify an aviation specific platform that will actually take you on as a merchant. So that's very, very, very important. Number two, just general remittance and settlement, that being very important as well. If you don't have a robust credit facility with a significant amount of credit or a line of credit available to you, then you can easily, if you're growing too quickly, end up losing business because you simply don't have the credit facility and the means to execute that charter, right?
Mm,
Not everyone is going to charter during the weekdays, right? And the best way to pay for a charter is via wire transfer, and you use a credit card for an authorization hold in the event that there are incidentals, right?
mm,
But after 5 p.m., you can't send wires. So if you have to pay an operator, you would have to have a robust credit facility that you can
mm,
use until you have the ability to send them a wire transfer. Otherwise, you can't do that charter and you missed out on money. What about on the weekend? Same thing. Can't send
mm.
wires on the weekend because the Fed is closed. So these are all big time implications behind growing very quickly that anyone should be ready for. Financial infrastructure is of paramount importance.
Okay. And Aaron, what's the toughest constraint? Is it aircraft availability, operator reliability, customer expectation management, or internal capacity?
I'd say it's a mix of all of the above, Mark.
Okay.
And I think that's a great question because when you relegate some of your biggest challenges to one area just because you have to choose, you're not truly capturing how all of these things actually are intertwined and impact one another, right? So, um, I could go into an anecdotal like response, but I know I'm known for that, so I'm not going to do that. But these things they do mesh and blend into one another at some point. And what's critical when it comes to understanding the space from my perspective is everything doesn't have to be charter focused, right? I'm not going to spill the beans completely, but you can take a guess if you'd like. The most prestigious university in the world reached out to me after an interview that Kelvin and I had that was on the internet. And we were speaking with a journalist about some of the interesting things that we're doing in the space. And one in particular that came up is the interest that we have in HVO. Are you familiar with HVO?
Yes.
So we actually did receive a call from again, the most prestigious university in the world, and working with their special institute and the top professor there for these specific renewable energy oriented items because they heard how passionate we were about HVO and being able to create an infrastructure for the rapid synthesis of HVO so that we could come up with these renewable sources of energy aside from using traditional fueling sources that have an extremely exorbitant amount of capital being allocated toward the price per barrel, which is actually the driving force behind why the charter prices are so high. So if
Hmm.
we could take waste and repurpose waste and turn it into, again, a renewable energy source that is fueling, no pun intended, the private aviation industry, then we create a paradigm shift in the way people look at things. And now we're democratizing the access of private aviation so that it's not just for the haves and aspirational for the have nots, but it's, again, being looked at the same way we would look at first class, meaning it's a quality experience, but it's attainable. So some of those strategic initiatives within private aviation are what really carve out a path to make a substantial impact and assisting in making things better for everyone in the ecosystem. Owners would love to have access to a more affordable fueling source, right? Operators would love to have access to a more affordable fueling source, right? And it trickles down because now brokers get more competitive pricing and the end client consequently gets more competitive pricing while we reduce the carbon emissions that are being emitted by way of different charters. So it's literally impacting the supply chain, impacting the entire economy, demand, supply side, et cetera, within the private aviation space, and then ultimately doing good for just our world in general, right? Greenhouse effect, excessive carbon
Mhm.
emissions, so on and so forth. So from an ESG perspective, it has long-term implications as well.
Okay. So, Aaron, is the bigger challenge generating demand or handling demand consistently?
Handling demand consistently. You know, right now we're actually in talks with a few different family offices and private equity firms with regard to making approved jets a completely vertically integrated private aviation platform. So rather than being positioned solely as a broker, we want to move upstream in the supply chain to be positioned as a Part 135 operator and also
Okay.
owners. Because now we'll be able to meet the demand. We have a ton of demand, a ton, all the time. It's
Mm,
about being able to meet the demand. And when you're a broker, again, like I mentioned, you're fully downstream, right? So because of that,
mm.
we just have less levers from a push and pull perspective in terms of leverage that we have to be able to fulfill all of the requests that we get.
Okay. What does a qualified client mean for approved jets? And what makes someone a bad fit?
Qualified client is someone who wants to experience white glove service, right? At the
Yeah.
highest level.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's anyone. Anyone's a qualified client. However, we would prefer people who have flown private before because then that reduces the friction that comes with us having to educate them on
Mm,
what the experience actually looks like. And that also helps us mitigate the risk of someone showing up 2 to 3 hours late and wondering why they have to allocate additional sums toward a late fee or a late APU fee because the APU was
mm.
running in anticipation of this passenger arriving and them leaving in a punctual manner.
Okay. So, Aaron, you mentioned aviation is a relationship industry. And
Right.
where does technology help and where can it harm trust?
Yeah. Well, I'd say immediately what harms trust is a data breach.
Mm.
So ensuring that you have security protocols and security measures, that assists a ton. And that's of paramount importance. So that's where technology can really hurt you, right? Any company. Where it helps is automating things that don't necessarily require the human touch. We're all about the relationship. We're all about service delivery. We're all about SLAs and making sure different service level agreements are being met. But most importantly, anything else, you cannot insert technology where a human touch is required. It'll never compensate for it, ever, right? And what I think we've been able to do is, due to our understanding of different types of emerging technologies, data science oriented technologies, AI, machine learning, all of that has afforded us the opportunity to gain greater insight and understand the context in terms of the hybrid approach between the human touch and AI powered technology or any other emerging technology, so that we're not sitting in a bubble where everything is a manual paper process and we're just, screaming at the top of our lungs, human touch, or something being completely tech oriented where you'll never have human intervention and some of the fine details may be lost. And also some of the more personal components may be lost. And that's the reason why we like to strike the balance between the human touch and leveraging technology in order to make things better.
Okay. And what trends do you think are underappreciated right now in private aviation?
What do you mean by that exactly, Mark?
Well, trends as in things that are developing services.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Yeah. So people really like to take advantage of empty legs. And for
Mhm.
us, we see empty legs as an opportunity to be able to introduce more people to the private aviation experience. That's really just what it comes down to. Empty legs give you that opportunity to do that because they're coming in at a significantly reduced price point. Could be anywhere from 20% off the
Mhm.
traditional charter price to even being 80% off, right? So that would be one in particular for sure.
So, what advice would you give someone new to charter so they don't become a nightmare client?
I'd say arrive on time. Um, don't make a mess on the aircraft, and find a good broker. Don't work with someone who you can obviously tell is transactional, right? If the person's transactional, you're going to get a transactional experience one way or another. But if the person is literally like advising you and trying to be an asset and be a resource while you're traveling, then
Hmm.
that's a relationship that's worthwhile nurturing and keeping for sure.
Perfect. Aaron, this is excellent. And thank you for the clarity, especially around the supply chain and expectation setting.
Absolutely.
And our audience, if they want to reach out to you, contact you, how would they do that?
So you can reach out to me at Aaron at approved-jets.com. So that's Aaron. That's my email address. You can follow me on Instagram at Aaron Wilson VC, like vegetable carrot. Aaron Wilson VC, like vegetable carrot. Or
Okay.
we could say Aaron Wilson VC, like very charming. I don't know. I don't know.
I love it. Well, we will include approved jets and your details in the show notes. And as
Awesome.
always, I'll send you the cut to review. And thank you for your insights into this area. Thank you
Absolutely.
again.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate that, Mark.